Chapter 1. A Lady in Distress. It was in the latter part of October when London had surrendered itself to the melancholy embrace of autumn. A perpetual fog hung over the city like a funeral shroud, through which the gas lamps shone with a sickly, jaundiced glow. The incessant drizzle had persisted for days, transforming the streets into glistening ribbons of mud and forcing even the most intrepid souls to seek refuge indoors. It was on such a dismal afternoon that Holmes and I sat in our lodgings at Baker Street. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the cluttered room, while the wind occasionally howled down the chimney like some tormented spirit. Holmes had been in one of his contemplative moods since morning, barely uttering a word as he reclined in his armchair, his eyes half closed, long fingers steepled beneath his chin. I had been attempting to peruse the latest medical journal, but found my attention constantly drawn to the window, where raindrops performed their relentless percussion against the glass. The gloom outside had somehow infiltrated our quarters, and I was considering suggesting a brisk walk, weather be damned, when Mrs. Hudson's familiar knock interrupted the silence. "A visitor, Mr. Holmes," she announced, her usually composed features betraying a hint of concern. "A Lady Margaret Worthington. She seems most distressed, sir." Holmes's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. "Show her in at once, Mrs. Hudson." The woman who entered our sitting room was young, no more than 25, and possessed a beauty that even her evident distress could not diminish. She was impeccably attired in the latest fashion, though her pallor and the dark circles beneath her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and considerable anxiety. Her gloved hands clutched at a small leather case with such intensity that her knuckles must have been white beneath the fine material. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," her voice quavered slightly, though she made a visible effort to maintain her composure. "I am Lady Margaret Worthington. Forgive this intrusion, but I find myself in circumstances most disturbing." Holmes rose gracefully, gesturing toward the chair opposite his own. "Not an intrusion at all, Lady Margaret. Please be seated. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who assists me in my cases and chronicles our adventures. You may speak freely before him." She nodded in my direction, though her gaze quickly returned to Holmes. As she seated herself, I noticed how the firelight caught the tremor in her hands. "Tea, perhaps?" I offered, but she shook her head. "No, thank you, Doctor. I fear my nerves would not permit it." She drew a deep breath. "Mr. Holmes, I come to you because I believe my life may be in danger, from a source that most rational minds would dismiss as superstition." "You intrigue me already, Lady Margaret," said Holmes, settling back into his chair. "Pray continue." With hands that still trembled visibly, she placed the leather case upon the small table between them and carefully opened it. Inside, nestled against black velvet, lay what appeared to be the most magnificent sapphire necklace I had ever beheld. Even in the subdued light of our sitting room, the stones seemed to possess an inner luminescence, their deep blue hue reminiscent of twilight skies over the ocean. "This necklace," she began, her voice steadier now, "has been in my family for 3 generations. It was acquired by my grandfather, Colonel James Worthington, during his service in India. Upon the recent death of my aunt, who had possessed it these 30 years past, it came into my keeping as the last of the direct Worthington line." Holmes leaned forward, his keen eyes studying the jewels with evident interest. "May I?" he asked, and upon receiving her nod, lifted the necklace from its case with delicate precision. "Remarkable," he murmured. "These are no ordinary sapphires. Their color and clarity suggest they originated from the Kashmir region, quite rare and exceptionally valuable. But you did not come to consult me regarding their worth, I think." "No, Mr. Holmes." Lady Margaret's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I came because of the curse." At this, I confess, I could not suppress a small smile, which I hastily concealed upon observing the genuine terror in our visitor's eyes. "Since the necklace came into my possession 3 weeks ago," she continued, "the most dreadful things have occurred. I have been plagued by nightmares of such vivid horror that I wake screaming. Strange sounds echo through my manor house at night, footsteps where no one walks, whispers in empty rooms. Twice I have glimpsed a figure in flowing robes that vanishes when approached. Holmes's expression remained impassive, though I knew him too well to mistake his silence for dismissal. He was absorbing every detail, every nuance of her account. More alarmingly, 3 of my household staff have fallen mysteriously ill, with symptoms that confound my family physician. And there is talk among the servants, talk that I would have dismissed as nonsense before experiencing these events myself, of a curse placed upon these sapphires when they were taken from their rightful place in India. By whom was this curse supposedly placed? Holmes inquired, still examining the necklace with his pocket lens. By a temple priestess, they say, in her dying moments as my grandfather's regiment seized the temple treasures during the Indian rebellion. Lady Margaret's voice faltered. Holmes, I am not a fanciful woman given to superstition. I was educated at Girton College and have always prided myself on rational thought. But something malevolent surrounds this necklace. I can feel it, like a presence watching, waiting. Holmes returned the necklace to its case with a thoughtful expression. Lady Margaret, while I share your preference for rational explanations, I have learned in my career that fear itself, whether of supernatural or mundane origin, can often presage genuine danger. Tell me, have you received any unusual correspondence or visitors since inheriting this piece? None that I can recall, she replied, then hesitated. Although the caretaker did mention a gentleman of foreign appearance making inquiries in the village about my aunt's jewelry collection shortly before her death. I thought nothing of it at the time. And this illness affecting your staff, what symptoms do they display? Weakness, disorientation, troubled vision? Doctor, Fleming believes it may be a tropical malady, though how such a thing could reach Northumberland. She trailed off, the implication hanging in the air between us. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed upon the dying embers in the fireplace. Outside, the rain had intensified, lashing against the windows with renewed fury. Lady Margaret, he said at last, I will accept your case. The correlation between your inheritance of this necklace and the subsequent occurrences is too pronounced to dismiss. I would ask that you leave the sapphires in my safekeeping for tonight, and tomorrow Dr. Watson and I shall accompany you to your estate to investigate further. Relief flooded her features. Oh, thank you, Mr. Holmes. You cannot know what a comfort your assistance provides. As she rose to take her leave, a sudden gust of wind extinguished 2 of the lamps, plunging half the room into shadow. In that instant, I could have sworn the sapphires in their case emitted a faint, pulsing blue glow. Lady Margaret gasped, and Holmes's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. One final question, if I may, he said, escorting her to the door. Did your aunt experience any similar phenomena while the necklace was in her possession? Lady Margaret paused on the threshold. My aunt never wore the necklace, Mr. Holmes. She kept it locked away from the day my grandfather died, saying only that some treasures exact too high a price from their owners. With those words, she departed into the rainy darkness, leaving us with the ominous weight of her story, and a case that would soon lead us into the shadowy intersection of colonial history, vengeance, and what appeared at least for the moment to be a manifestation of forces beyond rational explanation. Little did I know that the true nature of the curse, and the surprising identity of our client, would prove more astonishing than any supernatural theory I might have entertained on that dreary October evening. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The following morning dawned with an oppressive mist that clung to London like a spectral shroud. Holmes had risen before me, and was already deep in research when I emerged from my chamber. Scattered across the breakfast table were numerous documents, newspaper cuttings, and a leather-bound volume on Indian gemstones. Ah, Watson, he greeted me without looking up. I've been investigating the history of Lady Margaret's sapphires, most illuminating. "What have you discovered?" I inquired, pouring myself a cup of tea. "Colonel Worthington's military record shows he served with distinction, or at least what the Empire considered distinction, during the Indian Rebellion. His regiment was instrumental in suppressing an uprising near Jaipur in 1857. Holmes pushed a yellowed newspaper toward me. The official account lauds him for securing valuable artifacts that might otherwise have been destroyed in the chaos. No specific mention of sapphires, but reading between the lines suggests acquisition under rather dubious circumstances. Holmes held the necklace to the meager light filtering through our window. "These stones have passed through several hands since the Colonel's return to England. His widow wore them briefly before her sudden death from nervous exhaustion. Their son never touched them, passing them directly to his sister, our client's aunt, who, as we learned, kept them locked away. The sapphires seem to absorb rather than reflect the morning light, their blue depths impenetrable. I've arranged for you to visit the Worthington estate today," Holmes continued, returning the necklace to its case. "Your medical expertise may shed light on the servant's mysterious ailments, while I pursue another line of inquiry here in London." By noon I found myself on a northbound train to Northumberland. The journey was uneventful, though I confess the leather case containing the necklace, which Holmes had insisted I return to Lady Margaret, weighed heavily in my thoughts. Upon arrival at Worthington Manor, I was struck by the edifice's sombre grandeur. Grey stone walls rose imposingly against the backdrop of wind-swept moors, while ancient elms stood like sentinels along the gravel drive. Lady Margaret received me in the drawing-room, her appearance even more haggard than the previous day. After brief pleasantries, she led me to the servants' quarters, where I examined the 3 afflicted staff members. Their symptoms were indeed peculiar: dilated pupils, elevated pulse, episodes of confusion, and disturbing visual hallucinations. Most telling was a faint bluish tinge to their fingertips that suggested no ordinary illness. "Tell me," I asked the lady's maid, a young woman named Clara, "have you handled your mistress's jewelry recently?" "Only the sapphire necklace, sir," she replied weakly. "I helped Lady Margaret with it 3 nights past when she wore it for dinner." Similar answers came from the footman and the cook, both of whom had touched the necklace within the past fortnight. My medical instincts increasingly pointed towards some form of poisoning, rather than infection. As dusk settled over the estate, Lady Margaret insisted I stay the night. "The last train has departed, Doctor, and I confess I find your presence reassuring." Over dinner in the cavernous dining room, where shadows danced in the candlelight, she spoke more freely about her family history. "My grandfather rarely discussed his time in India, but in his final years he became increasingly troubled. The servants would find him wandering the corridors at night, muttering about eyes watching from the darkness. Later, unable to sleep in the oppressive silence of my guest chamber, I stood at the window overlooking the gardens. The moon had emerged from behind clouds, casting a silvery glow over the grounds. It was then that I observed a figure moving furtively among the hedgerows, a tall, slender silhouette that seemed to glide rather than walk. Without hesitation, I seized my revolver and hurried downstairs. The night air was bitter cold as I stepped onto the terrace. The figure had vanished, but a faint rustling led me toward a stone gazebo at the garden's edge. Before I could investigate further, a hand grasped my shoulder. I spun around, finger on the trigger, to find Lady Margaret in her dressing gown, her face pale as death in the moonlight. "You saw it too, then," she whispered, "the shadow that haunts my dreams." Before I could respond, a distant clock chimed midnight, and with it came a sound that froze the blood in my veins, a low, keening wail that seemed to emanate from the sapphire necklace itself, which Lady Margaret clutched to her breast. In that moment I understood why Holmes had insisted I bring the necklace. He had anticipated that its presence might catalyze events, revealing connections invisible to routine observation. As the unearthly sound faded, Lady Margaret collapsed against me, the necklace slipping from her grasp onto the frost-covered grass. As I bent to retrieve it, the moonlight caught its facets, and for an instant I could have sworn I saw movement within the stones, the fleeting image of a woman in flowing robes, her face contorted in an expression of profound malevolence. Meanwhile, in London, Holmes was making discoveries of his own. A telegram arrived from him at dawn. Have traced previous owners, all met untimely ends. Records mention dispossessed Indian noble family. Last heir arrived London 3 months ago. Return immediately. Bring sample of blue residue from servant's hands. Holmes, as I prepared to depart, I gazed once more at the necklace, now innocently gleaming in the morning light. What dark secrets lay within those azure depths? And who was the shadowy figure in the garden? I sensed we were merely scratching the surface of a mystery that had claimed lives across generations and continents. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Household. Upon my return to Baker Street, I found Holmes in a state of intense concentration, surrounded by chemical apparatus and reference volumes. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon light, and the air was heavy with acrid fumes. "Ah, Watson, excellent timing," he exclaimed, taking the small vial of blue residue I had collected from the servant's hands. "I trust your visit to Worthington Manor was illuminating." I recounted my observations while Holmes subjected the sample to various tests, his lean face illuminated by the blue flame of his Bunsen burner. When I described the spectral whale and the figure in the garden, he showed neither surprise nor skepticism. "Most suggestive," he murmured. "Did you note any peculiarities about the necklace itself?" "Only that Lady Margaret seems increasingly drawn to it despite her fear. She wore it at dinner, though she had earlier expressed reluctance to even touch it." Holmes nodded, adding a reagent to the blue substance. "As I suspected, this is no ordinary toxin. It bears similarities to certain plant-derived compounds found in northern India, particularly in regions with temple complexes." He straightened, eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. "We must return to Worthington Manor at once. Pack your medical bag, Watson. I fear another servant may have fallen ill in your absence." The journey north was undertaken in relative silence. Holmes absorbed in a leather-bound journal that I recognized as belonging to the Royal Asiatic Society. As our train rattled through the gathering darkness, he finally spoke. "There is a particular temple complex near Jaipur, dedicated to Kali, the goddess of death and rebirth. According to this account, written by a botanist who accompanied a military expedition in 1856, the temple gardens contained plants cultivated for their unique properties. Some induced visions, others sleep, and a few, he tapped a passage in the journal, were said to bind the soul to an object, ensuring that anyone who possessed it unlawfully would be haunted until death or return of the item. Surely you don't suggest—" "I suggest nothing yet, Watson. I merely collect facts. Colonial records rarely document the full extent of what was acquired during military campaigns. Colonel Worthington's official reports mention only cultural artifacts, but private correspondence I uncovered at the India office hints at something far more valuable and perhaps sacred." Holmes was correct about the servant. Upon our arrival at Worthington Manor, we were informed that the butler had collapsed that morning with symptoms identical to the others. Lady Margaret, looking more haunted than ever, greeted us in the entrance hall, the sapphire necklace gleaming against her pale throat. "I cannot remove it," she whispered when she noticed my gaze. "Each time I try, the nightmares worsen. It's as though it has attached itself to me." While I attended to the butler, Holmes conducted a meticulous examination of the manor, paying particular attention to Lady Margaret's jewelry case. I joined him as dusk settled over the estate. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to the velvet interior of the case with his lens. "Minute scratches around where the sapphires rest, suggesting a mechanism, perhaps for delivering the substance you collected from the servants." He turned his attention to the necklace itself, which Lady Margaret had reluctantly surrendered for inspection. "Ingenious," he murmured. "The clasps and settings contain nearly invisible reservoirs. When handled or worn against warm skin, they would release trace amounts of the compound. He demonstrated by pressing a clasp against a piece of moistened paper, which immediately developed a faint blue tinge. But how could such a mechanism have been designed in the 1850s? I asked. That, my dear Watson, is where our mystery deepens. This is no Victorian craftsmanship. The design suggests intimate knowledge of both the poison and modern chemistry. We resolved to keep watch that night, positioning ourselves strategically throughout the manor. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional creak of ancient timbers and the mournful cry of an owl hunting on the moors. It was approaching 3 in the morning when a floorboard groaned in the corridor outside Lady Margaret's chamber. Holmes and I exchanged glances in the darkness, then moved silently toward the sound. A figure, tall and lean, was attempting to pick the lock to her door. "Hold, sir," Holmes commanded, his revolver leveled at the intruder. The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. He was young, perhaps 30, with the refined features and attire of a gentleman, though his movements betrayed nervous agitation. "I'm a journalist," he stammered, as we escorted him to the library. "Edward Harrington, of the London Chronicle. I'm researching an article on colonial artifacts and their historical significance." "At 3 in the morning using lockpicks?" Holmes' tone was coldly skeptical. "Your credentials, if you please." The man produced a press card that appeared genuine, yet Holmes's expression remained dubious. "You bear a remarkable resemblance to photographs I've seen of one Thomas Blackwood, associate of Cedric Winters, a pawnbroker known for dealing in ill-gotten antiquities." Color drained from the man's face. "I don't know what you're implying, Mr. Holmes, but I imply nothing. I state facts. Your right cuff bears traces of the same blue compound found on the Sapphire Necklace. Your accent suggests education in India, despite your English appearance, and the calluses on your fingers are those of someone accustomed to handling delicate jewelry rather than a journalist's pen." Before the man could respond, a piercing scream echoed through the manor. We rushed to Lady Margaret's chamber to find her thrashing in bed, the sapphires at her throat pulsing with an eerie blue luminescence. Her eyes were open but unseeing, fixed on some terrifying vision. "The priestess comes," she cried, her voice unnaturally deep. "She walks from the temple through blood and fire." Holmes administered a sedative from my medical bag, then turned to our captive. "Mr. Harrington, or whatever your name may be, it seems your interest in the sapphires has precipitated a crisis. I suggest you begin speaking truthfully, or Scotland Yard will be most interested in your nocturnal activities." As Lady Margaret's agitation subsided into uneasy sleep, the sapphire's glow gradually faded. The stranger's composure crumbled entirely. "The necklace was never meant to leave India," he whispered. "Those who took it unleashed something they could not understand, something beyond Western science or reason." Holmes studied him intently. "Tomorrow, Mr. Harrington, you will accompany us to London. There you will introduce us to your associates and explain precisely what you know about these sapphires and their curse. For tonight," he nodded to me, "Dr. Watson will ensure you remain our guest." As I secured our prisoner in an unused chamber, I glanced back at Lady Margaret's room, where Holmes stood silently observing her troubled sleep. The necklace lay on her bedside table, inert now, yet somehow menacing in its stillness. What ancient power had we disturbed? And was Holmes, the great rationalist, beginning to consider explanations beyond the scientific realm? The answer, I suspected, lay in London's shadowy corners, where the past and present, East and West, collided in ways neither empire nor science had fully comprehended. Chapter 4. The Secret Brotherhood. The following day found us in one of London's less salubrious districts, where narrow streets wound like serpents between decaying buildings. Our reluctant guide, who had finally admitted to being Thomas Blackwood, led us to a nondescript pawnbroker's shop nestled between a gin establishment and an opium den. "Mr. Winters is expecting us," he muttered, rapping a complex pattern upon the grimy door. We were admitted to a dimly lit interior, cluttered with the detritus of empire, jade carvings from China, brass figurines from Africa, and silk tapestries from Persia. Behind a scarred counter stood a corpulent man whose shrewd eyes assessed us with undisguised suspicion. "You bring unexpected company, Thomas," he remarked in cultured tones that belied his shabby appearance. "They left me little choice," Cedric Blackwood replied, then turned to Holmes. "Mr. Winters is merely our intermediary. The others will arrive shortly." "Others?" I inquired, hand instinctively moving toward the revolver in my pocket. "Members of the Brotherhood of Cali?" Holmes answered, before either man could speak. "An organization dedicated to repatriating items of cultural significance, or perhaps more accurately, sacred artifacts taken during Britain's colonial expansion." Winters raised an eyebrow. "Your reputation does not exaggerate, Mr. Holmes." "No, indeed," came a new voice from behind a beaded curtain. A dignified Indian gentleman emerged, followed by two companions, one English, one Indian. "I am Professor Amar Singh of Calcutta University. My colleagues Dr. Jonathan Fairchild of the British Museum and Mr. Patel, formerly of the Rajputana Civil Service. You have been investigating us," Professor Singh continued, gesturing for us to be seated amidst the cluttered shop. "Now we shall speak plainly. The Brotherhood exists to restore balance, to return items of spiritual significance to their rightful places, not for monetary gain, but because some treasures were never meant to leave their sacred sites." "Including the Worthington sapphires?" Holmes inquired. "Especially those," Dr. Fairchild interjected. "They were taken from the Temple of Kali near Jaipur during a particularly brutal suppression of local resistance. Colonel Worthington's regiment killed the priests and priestesses, looted the temple treasury, and burned the sacred texts. Yet you deny responsibility for the poisonings at Worthington Manor," Holmes pressed. "Categorically," Professor Singh replied firmly. "We seek justice, not vengeance. We use persuasion, negotiation, and occasionally, procurement." He glanced at Blackwood, "but never harm." "Then how do you explain the toxin embedded in the necklace? The illness afflicting the servants? Lady Margaret's deteriorating condition?" A heavy silence fell. Finally Dr. Fairchild spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are aspects to this case that transcend our understanding, Mr. Holmes. The sapphires were not merely valuable gems. They were conduits of power in ancient rituals. According to temple records we've recovered, they were believed to house the essence of Kali herself when properly consecrated. Superstition." I scoffed, though the memory of the necklace's eerie glow gave me pause. "Perhaps," Professor Singh acknowledged, "yet there is a Captain Harold Weatherby, formerly of Colonel Worthington's regiment, now dying in Chelsea Hospital, who might tell you otherwise. He witnessed the temple raid and has been tormented by nightmares ever since. We discovered him during our research, a broken man haunted by the memory of what occurred that day." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "You suggest we speak with this Captain Weatherby? We suggest that not all colonial acquisitions were mere trinkets, Mr. Holmes. Some carried histories and perhaps energies that your Western science has yet to comprehend." We departed shortly thereafter, Holmes lost in contemplation, as our hansom rattled toward Chelsea. The hospital was a grim utilitarian structure, where England's forgotten warriors were left to fade away with their memories of distant campaigns. Captain Weatherby occupied a small private room, his wasted form barely disturbing the blankets that covered him. His eyes, however, were startlingly alert in his gaunt face. "Sherlock Holmes," he wheezed when we introduced ourselves. "Providence sends you at the last. I've little time remaining, and much to unburden." "You are with Colonel Worthington in Jaipur," Holmes prompted gently. "God forgive me, yes." The old soldier's voice strengthened with the urgency of confession. "We were ordered to suppress a rebellion, but what we found was a temple, peaceful, wealthy. The colonel saw the sapphires during the initial parley, and became obsessed. When negotiations faltered, he ordered an attack. Weatherby's breathing grew labored. We slaughtered them. Priests, acolytes, even women. The high priestess was the last to fall. She wore the sapphires in a silver diadem. "Tell me about the curse," Holmes urged. Weatherby's eyes glazed with remembered horror. She knew she was dying. She took the diadem and held it in the flames of the burning temple, chanting in her native tongue. The sapphires, they changed, began to pulse with blue fire. His voice dropped to a whisper. She said the goddess would reclaim what was hers, that the sapphires would return to India on a tide of English blood. Then the colonel shot her, but her eyes never closed, even in death. A nurse appeared, signaling that our time was ending. As we rose to leave, Weatherby clutched Holmes's arm with surprising strength. The colonel was never the same after. None of us were. Harrison hanged himself 6 months later. Williams drowned in his bath. Fletcher wasted away like I'm doing. And the colonel, he became obsessed with the necklace he had remounted in London. Wore it, talked to it. In his final days, he would scream that he saw her, the priestess, walking toward him through flames. As we departed into the gathering dusk, Holmes was unusually subdued. "What do you make of his account, Watson?" "The ravings of a guilty conscience," I replied, though without conviction. "Or perhaps there are forces at work that defy conventional explanation." He hailed a hansom. "We must return to Worthington Manor immediately. I fear Lady Margaret may be in graver danger than we realized." We arrived as night was falling, a gibbous moon rising over the moors. The manor stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with warm light that belied the malevolence lurking within. Lady Margaret's maid met us at the door, her face etched with concern. "She's been walking the grounds all afternoon, sir, talking to herself, won't let anyone near the necklace. Says she's preparing for the return." Holmes and I exchanged glances and hurried through the manor and out onto the terrace. In the garden below, Lady Margaret stood motionless beside the stone fountain, the sapphire necklace gleaming at her throat. As we watched in horrified fascination, she began to walk with mechanical precision toward the cliffs that bordered the eastern edge of the estate. More alarming still was the necklace itself, pulsing with an unearthly blue luminescence that cast strange shadows across the grounds. Lady Margaret's face, turned briefly toward the rising moon, bore an expression of rapturous terror, her eyes wide yet unseeing. "We must stop her," I exclaimed, but Holmes gripped my arm. "Observe, Watson," he whispered, pointing to the moon-cast shadow that trailed behind our client as she walked. It was not the shadow of Lady Margaret Worthington that stretched across the frost-covered grass, but the unmistakable silhouette of a woman in flowing robes, crowned with an ancient diadem. Chapter 5. The Witness from the Past. Without a moment's hesitation, Holmes and I raced across the frost-covered lawn toward Lady Margaret. The moonlight cast our elongated shadows before us as we ran, a macabre trio of pursuer and pursued. As we drew nearer, I observed with mounting horror that Lady Margaret's movements were not her own. She moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, entirely at odds with her usual reserved demeanor. "Lady Margaret," I called, but she gave no indication of having heard me. Holmes reached her just as she approached the precipitous edge of the cliff. With remarkable dexterity, he placed himself between her and the sheer drop, speaking in a low, commanding tone. "You must stop. The necklace is controlling you." Her eyes, when they met his, were vacant, pools of darkness that reflected the sapphire's uncanny glow. "I must return them," she intoned, her voice carrying a strange, echoing quality. "She calls them home across the waters." With a swift movement that took both Lady Margaret and me by surprise, Holmes reached out and unclasped the necklace from her throat. The moment the sapphires lost contact with her skin, she collapsed like a marionette with severed strings. I caught her before she struck the ground, while Holmes held the necklace at arm's length, its blue fire seeming to pulse with fury at the interruption. We carried Lady Margaret back to the manor, where she was placed under the care of her maid. The necklace Holmes secured in a metal strongbox, which he locked and placed within his valise. "What now, Holmes?" I asked as we gathered in the library, a roaring fire doing little to dispel the chill that had settled in my bones. "Now, Watson?" We searched for rational answers. He was already examining Lady Margaret's personal effects that the housekeeper had reluctantly provided. "Ah, what have we here?" From a hidden compartment in an ornate writing desk, Holmes extracted a small leather case. Within lay a faded photograph depicting a temple complex, its architecture distinctly Indian, and a fragment of what appeared to be a personal journal. "Colonel Worthington's private thoughts," Holmes murmured, scanning the yellowed pages. "Listen to this, Watson. June 15th, 1876. The dreams worsen. I see her standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes burning with the same blue fire as the cursed stones. She speaks in her heathen tongue, but I understand her meaning well enough. She says the sapphires will return to India, carried by blood of my blood. God help me, I begin to believe her." "The ramblings of a guilty mind," I suggested, though with less conviction than before. Perhaps there is more to this curse than mere superstition." Holmes continued his methodical search, eventually discovering a hidden drawer containing vials of various substances. "Most interesting. It appears the Colonel was experimenting with chemical compounds in his final years." Holmes spent the remainder of the night analyzing both the sapphires and the mysterious substances in his portable laboratory kit, which he had fortunately brought along. I dozed intermittently in an armchair, awakening at dawn to find him still absorbed in his work, his face haggard but triumphant. "The sapphires possess quite remarkable properties, Watson. When subjected to specific wavelengths of light or changes in temperature, they emit a faint phosphorescence. More significantly, they contain microscopic pores that appear to have been treated with a substance unknown to Western chemistry, a compound that reacts with human perspiration to produce mild hallucinogenic effects." "So there is a scientific explanation after all," I said with relief. "For the physical symptoms, yes. For Lady Margaret's behavior and the apparitions, partially. But there remain elements that defy conventional understanding." His expression was troubled. "The chemical compound appears to induce a specific type of hallucination, one that consistently manifests as the temple priestess, and the sapphire's luminescence occurred even when no human contact was present." Later that morning we returned to London. Lady Margaret securely settled with a trusted nurse, the necklace safely stowed in Holmes's valise. Upon arriving at Baker Street, my friend immediately dispatched a flurry of telegrams, then settled in with his chemical apparatus to conduct further tests on the sapphires. "There must be someone in London who witnessed the original events," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Someone besides the dying captain, someone who might understand the connection between the priestess's curse and the necklace's apparent influence over Lady Margaret." Holmes's instincts proved correct. By mid-afternoon, a response to one of his inquiries arrived from a contact at the India office. "There is a woman," Holmes read aloud, "Mira Bai, once a handmaiden at the Temple of Kali. She survived the massacre by hiding among the dead. Now elderly, she resides in London's East End, where she works as a seamstress. We found her in a modest dwelling off Commercial Road, her tiny rooms fragrant with unfamiliar spices and incense. Despite her advanced years, Mira Bai's dark eyes were sharp with intelligence, her bearing dignified as she welcomed us. 'I have been expecting you,' she said simply. 'The sapphires have awakened.' Holmes showed neither surprise nor skepticism. 'Tell us what you know of the curse,' he requested. The old woman's gaze grew distant. "I was 16 when the British soldiers came. The high priestess, Lakshmi, knew they sought the sacred stones. She had prepared for this eventuality." Mirabai's voice lowered. "The curse was not merely words spoken in anger, Mr. Holmes. It was science and spirituality combined in a way your Western mind might struggle to comprehend." "The toxin embedded in the stones," Holmes prompted. She nodded. extracted from rare plants grown in the temple gardens, combined with minerals ground to the finest powder, then sealed within the sapphires through a process known only to the highest initiates. The stones were designed to gradually affect anyone who possessed them unlawfully. First dreams, then visions, finally a compulsion to return them to their rightful place. But why target the colonel's descendants? Why Lady Margaret specifically? The high priestess used blood magic in her final moments, her own blood spilled on the stones, creating a connection to those of the colonel's lineage. The sapphires would call most strongly to the one whose spirit was most receptive. Her eyes narrowed. "Tell me, does Lady Margaret bear any physical resemblance to my people?" Holmes and I exchanged glances, both recalling Lady Margaret's unusually dark eyes and olive complexion, features that had seemed unremarkable until this moment. "There is something else," Mirabai continued. "Before the attack, Lakshmi hid the temple's most sacred text, a manuscript detailing the sapphire's powers and their proper ritual use. She entrusted it to a British officer who had shown kindness to our people, a man who later left the military in disgust at what he had witnessed." "Do you know this officer's name?" Holmes asked urgently. "Lieutenant Edward Thornton. He promised to protect both the manuscript and any survivors of the massacre." She smiled sadly. "He arranged my passage to England, found me employment. I have not seen him in many years, but I believe he settled in Norfolk after leaving the army." As we took our leave, Holmes was unusually silent, his brow furrowed in concentration. Outside, the London fog had descended, wrapping the streets in a ghostly shroud. We had walked several paces when Holmes suddenly halted, gripping my arm. "We are being followed, Watson," he murmured. "At least 3 individuals, moving with professional stealth." I reached for my revolver, but Holmes stayed my hand. "Not here. We must lead them away from Mirabai. She has endured enough violence at British hands." We quickened our pace, turning abruptly down an alleyway. The footsteps behind us accelerated in response. As we emerged onto a broader street, I glanced back to see multiple shadowy figures converging on our position, their faces obscured by the swirling fog. "Run, Watson," Holmes commanded, and we plunged into the labyrinthine streets of London's East End, the sapphires in Holmes's valise seeming to pulse with an inner light as they drew our pursuers inexorably toward us. Chapter 6. The true nature of the curse. Our flight through London's fog-shrouded streets took us through a bewildering maze of alleyways and courtyards. Holmes led with the unerring instinct of a man who knew every cobblestone of the metropolis, while I followed, revolver at the ready, casting frequent glances over my shoulder at our pursuers, dark silhouettes that appeared and vanished in the swirling mist like spectral hunters. "This way, Watson," Holmes hissed, pulling me into a narrow passage between 2 warehouses. We emerged onto the Thames embankment, where the fog hung heavy over the black water. A solitary hansom cab approached, and Holmes hailed it with an imperious gesture, "Baker Street," and quickly he instructed the driver, tossing him a sovereign. "There's another waiting if you lose anyone who might follow." As we clattered through the streets, Holmes's expression was one of deep concentration. "Our pursuers were not common footpads, Watson. Did you observe their movements? Military precision. And they emerged precisely as we learned of Lieutenant Thornton's existence. The Brotherhood? I think not. Their methods are more subtle. No, I suspect these men serve interests that would prefer the Sapphire's history, and the truth about colonial acquisitions remain buried." He patted his valise. "The necklace is the key to everything. We must secure it before returning to Worthington Manor." At Baker Street, Holmes immediately set about disguising himself as an elderly clergyman while instructing me to send telegrams to both Inspector Lestrade and Professor Singh. The sapphires he secured in a hidden wall safe behind a painting of the criminal Moriarty. "Now, Watson, we must locate Lieutenant Thornton with all haste. The manuscript he possesses may explain the final piece of this puzzle, the connection between Lady Margaret and the temple priestess, that seems to transcend mere chemical influence. A flurry of telegrams to contacts in Norfolk eventually yielded Thornton's location, a modest cottage near Sandringham, where he lived in retirement. By evening we were seated before his fire, the elderly former officer regarding us with wary intelligence. "I've been expecting someone," he admitted, pouring us each a brandy with a hand that trembled slightly. "Ever since the article appeared in the Times about Lady Worthington's inheritance. You knew the family?" Holmes inquired. I knew Colonel Worthington all too well. Thornton's face darkened with old anger. "I witnessed his brutality at the temple, a massacre that haunts me still. The high priestess Lakshmi was a woman of remarkable dignity and power. She knew they had come for the sapphires and offered a compromise, a sharing of the temple's knowledge in exchange for leaving the sacred stones undisturbed. Worthington refused. What followed? He trailed off, eyes distant with remembered horror. The manuscript, Holmes prompted gently. Thornton nodded, rising with effort to retrieve an iron-bound chest from beneath his bed. From it, he extracted a bundle wrapped in silk cloth. The temple's sacred text. I couldn't save Lakshmi, but I could honor her final request to preserve this knowledge and ensure it eventually returned to India along with the sapphires. The manuscript, written in Sanskrit with meticulous illustrations, detailed the sapphires' origins and their ritual preparation. Holmes, who possessed a working knowledge of ancient languages, translated portions with growing amazement. The gems were believed to be crystallized tears of the goddess Kali, he explained, treated through a complex alchemical process to serve as conduits between worlds. But there's more here than religious symbolism, detailed chemical formulations that align with my analysis of the stones. He looked up sharply. According to this, the priestess could transfer a portion of her consciousness into the stones through a blood ritual, creating a connection that would persist beyond death. Superstition, I murmured, though without conviction. Perhaps, Thornton replied. Yet there is one fact that may interest you, gentlemen. After the massacre, I helped a young temple handmaiden escape, Mirabai, whom I believe you've met. With her was another survivor, a child of perhaps 3 years. A girl with unusual eyes, one brown, one with a sliver of blue. What became of this child? Holmes asked, though I sensed he already anticipated the answer. She was the priestess's daughter. I entrusted her to the care of a childless officer's widow returning to England, a Mrs. Worthington, the colonel's sister-in-law. Thornton's gaze was steady. That child is now known as Lady Margaret Worthington. The revelation hung in the air like the tolling of a funeral bell. Holmes was the first to break the silence. She doesn't know. Her adoptive mother, her aunt as she believes, never told her. But shortly before her death, she entrusted Margaret with a letter explaining her true heritage, along with the sapphire necklace that was her birthright. Thornton sighed heavily. I've kept watch from a distance all these years. When I read that she had inherited the necklace, I feared the curse would manifest not through supernatural means but through the weight of concealed truth. Armed with this knowledge, we returned to London by the first morning train. Holmes had arranged for both Lestrade and members of the Brotherhood to meet us at Worthington Manor, where Lady Margaret awaited, still under the care of her trusted nurse. We arrived to find the manor bathed in pale winter sunshine that belied the tension within its walls. Lady Margaret received us in the drawing-room, her appearance much improved though her eyes remained troubled. I've been having strange dreams, Mr. Holmes, she said without preamble. Not nightmares this time, but memories that cannot possibly be mine. A temple with golden statues, chanting in a language I shouldn't understand, yet somehow do. Holmes nodded gravely. Lady Margaret, I believe the time has come for complete honesty. The sapphire necklace you inherited is indeed connected to a curse, but not of the supernatural variety you might imagine. He gestured to our assembled company, Lestrade, Professor Singh and his colleagues, Thornton, and Thomas Blackwood. Each person in this room possesses a piece of the truth. Together, we shall finally understand the full story. What followed was one of the most extraordinary revelations I have ever witnessed. Holmes began by explaining the chemical properties of sapphires, how they had been treated with compounds that induced hallucinations and created the physical symptoms experienced by those who handled them. But the true nature of the curse, he continued, transcends mere chemistry. The servants' illnesses, while concerning, were never life-threatening, designed to create fear rather than harm. The ghostly manifestations were partly chemical reaction, partly suggestion, and partly, here he hesitated, something less easily explained by Western science. The priestess's consciousness, Professor Singh supplied, what our traditions would call her Atman, her soul. Perhaps, Holmes acknowledged. What matters is that these effects were not random. They were specifically targeted at Lady Margaret from the beginning, not to harm her but to awaken her. Lady Margaret's face had grown increasingly pale. Awaken me to what, Mr. Holmes? To your true identity. Holmes's voice was gentle. You are not Colonel Worthington's granddaughter by blood. You are the daughter of Lakshmi, High Priestess of the Temple of Kali, brought to England as an infant, and raised as Margaret Worthington. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Margaret's hands trembled as she raised them to her face. The letter, she whispered. My aunt left me a letter with the necklace. I read it the night before coming to you, Mr. Holmes, and after reading it you began poisoning the servants. Holmes stated matter-of-factly. Not to kill them, but to create symptoms that would reinforce the legend of the curse. You orchestrated the ghostly appearances using chemical compounds found in your grandfather's, or rather, the Colonel's laboratory, knowledge perhaps awakened by your handling of the sapphires. Lestrade started forward, but Holmes raised a hand to stay him. Your goal was not malevolence, Lady Margaret, but justice. You sought to create sufficient fear around the necklace to justify its return to India, allowing you to fulfill what you saw as your sacred duty, without exposing the Worthington family's darkest secrets. Holmes's eyes were compassionate. Am I correct? A single tear traced down Lady Margaret's cheek. The letter revealed everything. The massacre, my adoption, the sapphire's significance. It said, my mother placed a portion of her spirit within them, so that someday she might guide me home. When I touched the necklace for the first time, she shuddered. I saw through her eyes, Mr. Holmes. I felt her dying moments, her desperate love for her child, her determination that justice would eventually prevail. So you decided to become the instrument of that justice, I said, understanding dawning. I couldn't simply announce my heritage or the necklace's bloody history. It would destroy the Worthington name and accomplish nothing. The Brotherhood had already contacted me, offering to purchase the sapphires discreetly, but that seemed insufficient atonement. She straightened, a new dignity evident in her bearing. The curse provided the perfect solution, a way to return the sapphires to their rightful place while preserving what remained of my adopted family's honor. Lestrade cleared his throat uncomfortably. This is all very well, Mr. Holmes, but poisoning is still a criminal offense, regardless of intention. Indeed it is, Inspector, Holmes agreed. However, I believe we might find a more satisfactory resolution than criminal charges. He turned to Professor Singh. The Brotherhood seeks the return of the sapphires to their temple, does it not? That has always been our purpose, the professor confirmed, along with the sacred manuscript. And you, Lieutenant Thornton, wish to see justice done for the massacre you witnessed. The elderly officer nodded gravely. It has been my life's mission. Then I propose this. Lady Margaret shall formally donate the sapphires to the temple, travelling to India herself as the priestess's daughter to complete the ritual of return. The Brotherhood will cease its clandestine activities regarding British colonial acquisitions, instead establishing a legitimate foundation for the scholarly study and potential repatriation of sacred items. Holmes's gaze swept the room. and the official record will show that the servants suffered from an unusual tropical malady, now resolved, thus preserving both justice and discretion. Professor Singh bowed slightly. The Brotherhood finds these terms acceptable. As do I, Lady Margaret whispered, relief evident in her voice. Lestrade appeared less convinced. Holmes, I cannot simply ignore. Consider, Lestrade, Holmes interrupted, the diplomatic incident that would ensue from publicly revealing British military atrocities in India. Consider also that Lady Margaret's actions, while technically illegal, caused no lasting harm, and were motivated by a desire for justice rather than vengeance. He smiled faintly. Sometimes the letter of the law must bend to accommodate its spirit. After much grumbling, Lestrade grudgingly acquiesced, and the matter was settled. The sapphires, still secured in Holmes's valise, were formally entrusted to Professor Singh, while arrangements were made for Lady Margaret's journey to India, not as an English aristocrat, but as Lakshmi's daughter returning at last to her ancestral home. As we departed Worthington Manor for the final time, Holmes was uncharacteristically reflective. An unusual case, Watson, one that challenges the boundaries between science and those aspects of human experience that defy conventional explanation. Do you believe there was truly something supernatural about the sapphires? I asked. I believe that our understanding of the natural world is far from complete, he replied carefully. The chemical properties of the stones explain much, but not everything, not the precise nature of Lady Margaret's visions, nor the peculiar luminescence that occurred without human contact. He glanced back at the manor, its windows catching the last golden rays of sunset. Perhaps some truths lie in the territory between empirical science and human belief, in that liminal space where justice, atonement, and the profound connections between human souls operate according to laws we have yet to fully comprehend. We walked in silence to the waiting carriage, the case closed, yet leaving in its wake questions that even Sherlock Holmes, the great rationalist, could not, or perhaps would not, definitively answer. Behind us, Lady Margaret stood on the terrace, her figure silhouetted against the dying light, no longer a woman cursed but one awakened to a heritage and purpose that transcended the narrow confines of Victorian society. As our carriage rolled away, I could not help but glance back one final time. For an instant, a trick of the fading light. Surely, I thought I saw another figure standing beside Lady Margaret, a woman in flowing robes with a gentle hand upon her daughter's shoulder. Then the image was gone, and there was only the solitary figure of Lady Margaret Worthington, gazing toward the east and the distant homeland she had never known yet, somehow, always remembered.